In September 1983, a computer in a secret Soviet bunker detected 5 American nuclear missiles heading straight for Moscow. The alarm screamed. Red lights flashed across the command center. On the screens, 5 bright dots crawled towards Soviet airspace. Protocol was clear. This was a first strike. The Americans had launched. Now the Soviets had minutes, maybe seconds, to fire back before their missiles were destroyed on the ground. One man sat at that console, his finger hovering near the button that would unleash nuclear hell on the United States. His name was Stanislav Petrov. He was 44 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces, and he was about to make the most important decision in human history. If he pressed that button, reporting the attack up the chain of command, Soviet leadership would almost certainly retaliate. Hundreds of millions of people would die within the hour. Cities would vanish. The world would end. But something felt wrong. Petrov stared at the screen. 5 missiles. Just 5. If the Americans were really launching a nuclear first strike, why only 5? The United States had thousands of warheads. A real attack would light up his screen like a fireworks show. Dozens, maybe hundreds of missiles. But this? 5 lonely dots on a radar screen? It didn't make sense. Either the Americans were idiots or something else was happening. His colleagues were shouting. The computer was never wrong, they said. The system had been tested 1,000 times. The satellites didn't lie. But Petrov had been trained as an engineer, not a soldier. He trusted math and logic, not panic. And the math here was insane. 5 missiles wouldn't destroy the Soviet Union, they'd just make it angry. No sane military commander would launch 5 missiles to start a nuclear war. He made his choice. He picked up the phone and reported a system malfunction, not an attack, a glitch. For 20 agonizing minutes, nobody knew if he was right. The dots kept moving on the screen. The alarms kept screaming. If those missiles were real, they'd hit Soviet soil any moment now. Petrov sat there, sweating, waiting for the flash of light that would prove he'd just killed millions of his own people by doing nothing. His superiors were screaming at him through the phone. His hands were shaking, but he didn't call it an attack. Then the 20 minutes passed. No explosions, no mushroom clouds, no incoming warheads. The dots on the screen vanished like ghosts. It was a false alarm. The computer had lied. Later, investigators figured out what happened. The Soviet early warning satellite had mistaken sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for the heat signature of launching missiles. It was a trick of the light, a glitch caused by the sun hitting the clouds at just the wrong angle, at just the wrong time of year, during just the wrong satellite pass. The computer saw 5 missiles because the satellite passed over 5 cloud formations. In other words, the Soviet Union almost launched nuclear war because of weather. But here's the truly insane part. Petrov wasn't a hero in the Soviet Union. He was investigated, reprimanded. His superiors were furious that he'd broken protocol by trusting his gut instead of the computer. They couldn't publicly admit this system had failed because that would make them look weak. So instead, they buried the story. Petrov was quietly shuffled into early retirement. For years, almost no one outside a small circle of Soviet officers knew what had happened that night. The world didn't find out until 1998, 15 years later, when a retired colonel mentioned the incident in his memoirs. Journalists tracked Petrov down in a tiny apartment outside Moscow. He was living on a small pension, forgotten by history. When they asked him why he disobeyed orders, he shrugged. I just didn't want to be the man who destroyed the world over a computer error. Think about that. One decision. One man. If Petrov had followed protocol, if he'd trusted the machine instead of his instincts, the Cold War would have ended that night, not with diplomacy or treaties, but with fire. The United States would have seen Soviet missiles launching and fired back. Within an hour, every major city in both countries would have been vaporized. Fallout would have blanketed the planet. Billions would have died in the months that followed from starvation, radiation, and nuclear winter. And it almost happened because a satellite got confused by sunlight. But it gets stranger. Stanislav Petrov wasn't supposed to be there that night. He was covering a shift for a colleague who'd called in sick. The regular officer, the one who should have been sitting at that console, was a by-the-book military man who believed computers over people. If he'd been on duty, he would have reported an attack. The substitution of one man for another, a random sick day, might have saved the world. Stanislav Petrov's story is a reminder of something terrifying and oddly hopeful. The world didn't end in 1983, not because of technology or politics or brilliant leadership. It survived because one man looked at a screen full of flashing red lights and said, "I don't buy it." He was right. And because of that, you're here reading this. Your parents were born, your city still exists. Life went on. All because a middle-aged Soviet officer decided to trust his gut over a computer and got yelled at for it. So the next time someone tells you one person can't change the world, remember Stanislav Petrov. He changed it by doing nothing. And thank God he did.